Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. No, this will not become a welding channel. This is my third and final installment playing with my new TIG welder. I've had a few questions about going over the basic setup, so I figured I'm going to knock that out today. I'm probably the last person you should take advice from. However, I've made all the mistakes, but stuck with it enough to at least now recognize the problem. I don't always mitigate it, but at least I got a good idea what I'm doing wrong. There are lots of people on YouTube where we are right now that can teach you a lot more than I do. They almost make it look too easy. They have to purposely make mistakes and show you how they do it, because on a normal day, they've welded so many hours, they really do make it look easy. I think I do a lot better with mechanical things because I've done it long enough. I have my basic setup. Things are very linear. You have a work area, be it small or large, the correct tools, some knowledge and some confidence, and not a lot of variables. Some, but not as much as welding. Welding, same thing. You have your tools and equipment and all that stuff, but then you introduce variables like what is the ingredients in this welding rod or this Chinese charge pipe that's going to come boiling out, the impurities as I get welding it, and probably ruin what might have been a decent bead. I actually relate TIG welding to golf, believe it or not. When I was a kid, noontime on Saturday, my dad would come home from work. He worked 5.5 days a week. Would have a quick lunch, and I would be his caddy for the afternoon. My dad's golf game was rough. He had a ton of power. He was a tall man, and if he hit it in the right direction, it was going to go a mile. But often it would go left or right. And I could hear him teaching himself, going through everything he'd read at that point probably, on how to do it properly when you address the ball and all the things you need to do to have success. I'm happy to report, in his retirement, he straightened his game out. He played every day and at least once on the weekends. And he got good, really good. His handicap, I forget what it was, but I think it got down in the single digits, which is pretty good. Over 80 years old, he would go to golf weekends and he'd still win long ball competitions where whoever hits it the furthest wins. He had that kind of power. He later attempted to teach me to play golf, and I still go through the same process every time I address the ball. It's the same when I go to TIG weld. I can MIG weld and stick weld without giving it too much thought because I usually get a good outcome, so you have a lot of confidence. When you stand up to the ball or address your welding situation, if you haven't had a lot of success, it certainly doesn't help your mental state. However, when you start getting a little success, it does. Let's start with the gas cylinder. This is my oxyacetylene torch setup. I got the gauges and the torch back in high school, and I wrote on it, set it 40 for the oxygen, and set it 7 for the acetylene. That seldom changes. Yes, there are probably some nuances, but those are the basic settings. I've never set it to anything else, and I've accomplished anything I wanted to do with my cutting torch. And also a good use of an old hat. On my MIG welder, the regulator setting is typically based on the nozzle size on the gun. This is a 1/2 inch. So 18 to 25, I usually run it midway, about 23 cubic feet per hour. I have not exercised good regulator care in the 25 years that I've had this regulator and MIG welder. I should be backing this off every time to take the tension off the spring on the regulator and set it every time I use it. I have not done that. I've done it on the torches religiously. I've started doing it on the TIG welder, and I'll show you why. On the MIG welder, I need to start doing that. In fact, I'm going to force myself to do it right now. So now it's backed off, and I'll have to reset that every time I use it. The MIG welder uses a 75-25 argon CO2 mix. Over here at the TIG welders, I have a flow meter for each welder. The cylinder is 100% argon, which is what you use the majority of the time TIG welding. I have learned that the connection from the valve to the gauge doesn't leak down. And just for kicks, I left one of these on at the setting I was using last overnight, and it still didn't leak, so that was a good test. It's good to know your equipment doesn't leak. However, I don't want the gas escaping from my cylinder. It only means I have to buy some more, and I'll be inconvenienced because I won't be able to weld. Unlike my torch cart and the MIG welder, where I seldom, if ever, change the setting on the flow meter, the TIG welder, you change it every time you change material. So, how do you figure that out? There are charts and graphs that'll get you the information you need to know, and of course there's the good old internet. But, as a basic rule of thumb, like this is a Monster 12 cup, double the number on the cup. So this would be 24, would be the setting on the flow regulator. If you have a number 6 cup, you're going to set it to 12. Simple as that. For 3 decades, I was surrounded in our mechanic's office with these cartoon-like torch and regulator safety warnings of people getting blown apart by doing stupid things with torches and bottles. But, much like my golf game, I don't open a torch bottle without thinking of them. This is the correct position I'm going to stand when I ease the valve open. Because if things go wrong, if the regulator blows out or the adjusters blow out, it's probably not coming back my direction. So the opposite side of where the nut of the regulator is where you want to stand, where you ease originally. Ease it on. This has been opened recently, so it's not going to have a big rush of gas. And the correct opening is all the way. All the way, not like on a house where you go back a little bit so it doesn't drip. All the way counterclockwise is the correct position. The exception to that rule is an acetylene bottle where you only crack it enough to use it. Because acetylene is very unstable and you want to be able to shut it off as fast as possible. When it comes to filler rod for TIG welding, you need to pick something that is compatible with your base metal. For instance, the intake elbow that I want to weld up, the elbow itself is cast, and the base is 6061 aluminum. 4047 would be an excellent choice for cast. I don't have any. 4043 is also acceptable and probably more compatible with my 6061 base plate. So again, you just have to choose what is compatible and the diameter that you want. For aluminum, probably the thicker the better. Other materials like the 3/16, 1/16 diameter stainless works good for like stainless exhaust because it doesn't leave a big bead. Whereas aluminum, it tends to gobble up the filler rod pretty fast. For mild steel and chrome moly steel, the ER70S2 or ER70S6 are both good choices. You need to look at tensile strength and what is acceptable for whatever sanctioning body you may be welding, for instance, a roll cage for. You're going to need a sharp tungsten. I only recently bought this relatively inexpensive tungsten sharpener. It has a few flaws, but it will do 1/16 and 3/32 in both 15 and 20 degree. It does a pretty good job at that. It won't do 1/8 inch. I have a dedicated grinding wheel that I use for that. If you're sharpening on a grinding wheel, I like to chuck it up in my cordless drill and hold it either this direction or this direction. I believe with this direction being preferred, so you spin it in the drill and just touch it on the grinding stone. A little research will tell you what angle would be preferred for whatever job you're doing. I don't think it's going to focus, but you get the idea. So we're getting closer to welding. We have a welder. It's plugged in and turned on, set to the proper amperage and other accessory options you may have turned on, like pulse. We have a gas bottle. The regulator is set to the right flow rate. We have chosen a tungsten of the correct size and type. Tungstens come in all different colors. They're marked by color. Each one will excel in a certain area and maybe cross over to do other types of material. There are many charts online to determine the correct one you need. And they also come, much like filler rod, in 1/16, 3/32, and 1/8 inch being the most popular sizes. Finally, we're at a bench. We have a ground clamp somewhere. Now you got to be careful with TIG welding, because TIG welding, it's possible to get shocked. I never have, but I've read it's possible. I always, because of that, was somewhat leery, and I always ground my work piece I'm actually working on. In my big Lincoln, the welder cable is huge, and it was always like the mean gorilla in the room, dragging my pot off the table. With the new TIG welder, I've got a little daring. I've shined up a corner of the bench, and this shiny area here, so far, I've only had one time, and instead of shocking me, it just started, you could hear the arc change a little bit, and I realized I was losing connection. So be leery of that, I guess. So anyway, we're going to weld something. How do we do that? Now, with a sharp tungsten, the correct gap you need to hold the point from the molten puddle you're going to create is 1/16 of an inch or less. Almost impossible, right? You have to keep that out of the weld puddle, but no more than 1/16 of an inch away, all while moving it forward, sometimes around curves, and adding filler rod without getting these stuck together. It's going to take some practice. And it's hard to do on a bench. Imagine doing it out of position. I have mad respect for guys that can lay in there on their head, like I've mentioned, and weld roll cages and stuff like that out of position. That's difficult. But the basic concept is, while maintaining your 1/16 inch or less gap, without dipping your tungsten. Once you dip, this touches either the puddle or the filler rod, stop and grind it. And if you're lucky, it's not stuck in your weld puddle or what you're trying to weld, the piece of the tungsten that's going to be missing. So every time you dip the tungsten, stop and grind it again. You're going to do it quite a bit when you first get going. 90 degrees. You want to lean the tungsten point so you can see it. That's the only reason you lean it. A lot of times if I'm doing dry shafts, I'll come at myself like this. That weld's really nice. This is, 90 degrees to the work surface instead of being, at an angle this way, because you can get too much torch angle and your flame's going to go crazy. And when it goes crazy, I mean it's going to turn glowing red hot and damage itself or spit everywhere. So you want to maintain this 90-degree angle regardless of what you're doing. You need to initiate the arc, and this is where I made mistakes for years. I guess I'm a floorboard it type of guy. You don't want to do that. You want to ease. It has a high frequency start. I have options on the new one. I can have lift. I can set it right on the work, and when I pick it up, it's going to start. I don't want that. I've never even tried it. If you have a switch, it's going to fire the high frequency. The high frequency is going to start the lightning, if you will, the lightning bolt between this and the workpiece. And you need to hold it there and increase the amperage with the foot pedal until you see you watch it in the torch window. Oh, I almost forgot, you need some thin gloves. I don't weld barehanded. I see people doing it. I won't dare to do it. Because I don't like getting burned. So you need some thin gloves so you can feed the filler rod and have a feel for it. And I have a cheap auto darkening helmet I've had forever, it seems. And I just love it. And I wouldn't know what to do without it. So you have some basic safety equipment. You've initiated your arc. You've held it there till it gets shiny. That's the exciting part, because once it does that, you can give it a little more amperage with the foot pedal and start dabbing, it's called, and advancing at the same time. And this is where like people like the stack of dimes look and stuff like that. If that's all advancing and stopping, adding, advancing and stopping, dabbing, adding, whatever you want to call it, That's your rhythm. You can just go right along. If I spent years just melting the rod in there, and it makes, you can see little ripples, but it's not a pronounced stack of dimes if that's something you need. In the welding world, that isn't really as important as it is as being really pretty. I recently learned when I turn on pulse, when I adjust the pulse settings to 1 or 2 times per second, I can just feed my rod in and go, but it's rippling for me, so that's pretty cool. But you're gonna dip your tungsten, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and that's just if everything goes well. It's very easy, especially in aluminum. You start off kind of cold, you apply enough throttle so you got your puddle wetted out. It's called wetting out when it liquefies and spreads out. You want it to spread out to 3/16, maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe not quite that much, and start advancing it. And now the workpiece warms up, and now you're too hot. You got to learn to back off the throttle and just keep the width of the puddle the same, all while going over certain positions and everything else. This is why TIG welding is difficult to master. And I've already told you, like at the beginning of the video, I have not mastered it yet. But I'm going to keep trying. Let me show you some of my mistakes I made just today because I actually practiced. I bought some weld coupons, busted them out of the box. I'm always my own worst enemy. I didn't clean them with aluminum or any material, but especially aluminum. I should be Scotch-Briting them and wiping it off with acetone. Instead, I make my life difficult and make practice harder. Next time, I'll clean the aluminum. But let me show you what I made a mistake at. And all the mistakes I made a ton. Here's a perfect demonstration of what I was just saying. I was too cold here. This is aluminum, thin aluminum. I was too cold, and then it actually got pretty good. And then toward the end, I was too hot. It was getting really wide, and eventually I even poked a hole in the end of the project. I should have been backing off the foot pedal and applying a little more filler for the end, and you can hopefully avoid that. Ending on a long run, or even starting on a run like this, is difficult on aluminum. Thin aluminum anyway, thicker material, and especially thicker steel. If you want to get better at TIG welding, weld some thick steel, 1/8 to 3/16, and you can make a lot of mistakes, have too much amperage, and still the weld may be gray looking, but you won't blow through anyway. So it takes that out of the equation, gives you a feeling for running the puddle, and then you can advance to thinner things. Here I was doing okay sticking these 2 pieces of 1/8 inch aluminum together. I had a pretty good run going. I tried to let up and add extra material at the end and just made it ugly. Then I went back up here and tried to fill the end in by getting the puddle going and then backing up, which if you're doing charge pipes and stuff like that, every time you stop and start, you need to initiate the arc on the bead you left behind last time. Get it liquid, back up first, and then start applying and move forward. That way it'll be completely sealed. So if you're trying to seal a tank or anything else like that, every time you stop and start, you need to initiate the arc on where you stopped over the bead, get it liquid, back up, and then start filling and going forward. So this is a horror show here. I was working on the other side. Goofing around again. I started too cold. Started picking up some junk, but this is a lot better. I tried to end without a crater and ended up making a crater. Here, in the lens of the helmet, it looked pretty good. Then I realized I was melting it away, so I stopped. I backed off and welded the end of it pretty decent and didn't even blow the end out too bad. This I tried doing with a dirty tungsten, and that's what happens. Here I welded a pretty decent bead, other than I picked up some junk, and then I decided to stick this piece of 3/8 to my 1/8 inch and had it going. The piece was hot by then, and it's ugly, but it was going, and then I just stopped. This poor piece of charge pipe is taking it hot. I did a lot. The big ugly ones was with the Lincoln, and then I'd shut it off and turn on the AHP, and this is where I discovered the pulse right here, this one right here. Started messing around with 1 or 2 pulses per second, and I went right from this the next day to my charge pipe. So don't worry if when you're done practicing there's a whole lot of ugly stuff that you wouldn't show anybody. But I just showed you mine because that's what it's all about. If all my beads came out flawless, I wouldn't be sitting here saying I need to practice, would I? I'd be, hey, I'm the greatest ever. Actually, you know me, I wouldn't say that, but you know what I mean. I'd be good at it and I'd be confident, and I'm not yet. And I guess the only way to get between where I am and there, much like my dad playing golf, is just keep doing it. So I hope you got something out of this. Again, there are people out there, I say the same thing with transmission stuff, that know a lot more than I do. I'm just doing my small part to share what I know. So have a great day. Catch you next time.